What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. Today's video, we diving into the historic meta. Since the bans have happened, since Jumpstart has added a whole bunch of new cards, I kind of want to go over a couple of decks that have been doing pretty well in the historic meta as of late. Since British Emissary has gone out of the format, Red Aggro is not the main dominant deck that you see in historic meta when you decide to play historic meta. The other reason why I kind of want to do this, we are a couple weeks out from the new historic open. If you don't know about it, it's been brought to us. It's going to be starting the 1st of August, so if you want to get yourself familiar in the historic meta before you really hop into a tournament and try to see how far you can go, I kind of wanted to go over the decks that you may see or may want to play, or decks you may want to build against if you're looking to do the day one, which is a best of one, which is, if you play the standard one, it's a best of one on day one, it's a best of three on day two if you make it to day two. But overall, today's video is going to be just going over the different meta decks that are happening. Also, just throwing it out there, this is a couple weeks in advance, and things haven't really truly developed because people are still trying to figure out certain things with the new cards added into the historic meta. So certain decks may jump up and down on the list. New decks that I haven't listed yet may jump into the list if people find them to be more of a successful win rate. A lot of these decks, from my understanding, from my research as I did to get the list to you guys, they're all averaging over 60% in best of one meta, so definitely decks that are very strong in that stance. So enough said of that, guys. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you want to know when I post more videos, hit that subscribe button. But let's dive into the different decks and kind of go over what they do. Alright, so the first deck up is going to be Bant Golos. If you don't know what Bant Golos is, if you're new to historic meta, the Golos deck is built around ramping up with a bunch of lands onto the battlefield, playing Field of the Dead, and then just getting a lot of mana onto the battlefield to just kind of ramp up into just creating a board of zombies, using a card called Golos. That is a legendary creature. If you are newer to Magic, maybe you don't know Golos, which his goal here is that he kind of searches our card for searches our library for a land card, puts it onto the battlefield tap, and shuffles our library. And then we can also tap a 7 mana, and we can actually exile top 3 cards of our library when we play them without playing a mana cost. So as much of this is a Bant deck, because we utilize the ramp cards that are here, so Explorers, Ghost Spirals, Elvish Rejuvenators, Arrows. Overall, the deck's goal here is to ramp up into big creatures, into Golos to help get more lands on the battlefield. Ugin is another big creature. Ulamog as just a very big creature on the battlefield. And then we can get big Hydroids, as well as if you look here at the land base, it is very all over the place. So if you are a person who likes playing pretty consolidated mana, maybe this is not the deck for you. But the reason why we play so many different lands is if you don't know what Field of the Dead does, whenever the Field of the Dead or another land enters battlefield under our control, if we control 7 or more lands of different names, we get a 2/2 zombie creature token. So Golos' goal here is kind of like our searcher for those lands. So we're going to try to get through the Field of the Dead. We're trying to play multiple copies of different lands. Yes, unfortunately, some of the lands do come into play tap. Because we're in Historic, it kind of doesn't actually matter because a lot of the lands that we do get can come into play untapped if we have certain things. We do play like breeding pools and things like that count as forests and lands. We play the new Triumphs, which counts as all the different types. So as much as our mana is all over the place, it is pretty Bant focused. And we're just playing big hits. We're just ramping up. And then if we can get to Field of the Dead and just kind of just cycling in more and more lands with Golos and stuff like that, we can definitely get a big effect. Overall, this deck is pretty solid. If we can get to the point where Golos is just taking over and getting us the lands we need, as well as removing the top X 3 cards of our library, we can play them up, play their mana cost. It kind of gets out of hand for our opponent pretty quickly, in that sense that we can kind of just play things like Ulamog, Ugin, things like that for free. You know, Arrows, things like that. It just gets definitely out of hand. If you have played historic meta, you probably play against this deck. But to just break it down real quick before we just kind of go on to the next deck, the deck consists of 4 Explorers, 4 Growth Spirals, 4 Elvish Rejuvenators, 3 Arrows, 4 Shatters, 1 Cleanse and Nova, as an interesting like destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments depending on the matchup, just because of like the artifact decks that are currently in the meta. It's kind of a good one or the other kind of thing to do one or the other. Get Kenrith, Golos, like I said, he's the guy who gets lands from our library onto the battlefield, as well as removing top cards. Ugin, if you've been playing standard, of course you know who Ugin is, you know what he does. It's definitely good against color decks that play multiple colors or decks that just play monocolored. Like Ugin's very good in that sense. Ulamog as a thing that mills our opponent, and then you know, it's just pretty good in general, just because it's indestructible. Exiles 2 target creatures, mills our opponent for 20 cards, so even if we don't get the Golos combo out, they have to deal with Ulamog, and they only can prove it like Elspeth Conqueror's Death or some sort of like make it a sacrifice or something like that. They really can't kill it with a kill spell, so that's really good. Hydra Crisis, just to kind of draw deeper into our deck, gain some life, draw draw cards, make a big flyer, and then just a whole bunch of lands. So 1 plains, 1 forest, or 1 plains, 1 island, 2 forests, 1 glacial fortress, 1 hollow fountain, 1 temple of enlightenment, 1 blossom sands, 1 temple grove, 2 temple gardens, 2 temple of plenties, 2 breeding pools, 1 hinterlands harbor, 1 temple of mastery, 1 thornwood falls, 1 Keetra, 1 Indatha, 1 Ragrin, 1 Zagroth, 1 Arch of Ostraza, 1 Blast Zone, 2 Fabled Passages, 1 Field of Ruin, and 4 Field of Dead. So overall, that is really what the deck is. There is a sideboard, because I'm going to assume, even if this is best of 1, a lot of people build decks for sideboards. I guess there's actually... Sorry, I apologize. Some of them did import sideboards from where I used. This time I used a different website that I normally do. I didn't use Aetherhub, just because Aetherhub I felt like was just going off based on what people were playing, but not based off what tournament results were. So these decks are kind of more so how these decks were placed in. So this is a deck that I think the list I went off of, I think it placed first in a arena zone tournament of 101 players. So it is a deck that did very well. That's also a tournament style deck, so that's the other thing too. You can make some slight adjustments if you want to play a more best of 1 style deck, but still a very strong deck even with this board. Maybe an aggressive deck would be the only issue for it, but overall this deck is fairly good. And a lot of cards you may have either, if you bought in any of the anthologies and or have been playing Magic for a while, you may already have a lot of these cards already. Also Explorers from New Jumpstart, so there's an easy way to get that. It's also a common, so it's pretty cheap in that sense. A couple of the weird cards would be like Cleansing Over from M19, and possibly Golos if you are newer to the game. So moving on to the next deck. All right, so the next deck up is Rakdos Aristocrats. If you've been playing Standard, you definitely know what this deck's all about. Rakdos Aristocrats just only gets a little bit stronger with the addition of the historic cards that kind of just make the deck overall better. To be quite honest, there really isn't too much that you may not know of that you don't already see in normal Rakdos. It literally looks like all the same cards, but the things that get a little different is there's a couple of lane cards, and I think there's some cards in the sideboard. But overall, the deck is pretty much straightforward as it would be on regular Standard. So we're playing the Cauldron Familiar, the good old cat oven. We got some Gutter Bones, just for some repeating effects that we can sacrifice and get it back from our graveyard, so we can do damage to our opponent's face. Stitcher Supplier is the other card that from M19 that allows us to mill 3 cards, so it puts things into our graveyard, which is good. But overall, 1/1 for 1 is definitely a good thing. Village Rites is a good draw spell that makes us sacrifice a creature, and we just draw 2 cards. Claim the first bone, take our opponent's things, untap it, attack with it. We can use it to sacrifice, which is Oven, because it cat triggers, and sacking our opponent's things is very good. Priest of the Forgotten Gods. We already know what this does. We sacrifice 2 creatures, target players each lose 2 life, and sacrifice a creature, and then we get more mana out of it. Roast Strider, because another sacrifice engine, which is very good. Combine that with the Mayhem Devil, which brings 1 damage to any target every time we sacrifice something, or anyone sacrifices anything. So it does this trigger every time something gets sacrificed. Bolts the Citadel, because it allows us to kind of just go through our deck, and if our opponent's already low, we can sacrifice 10 permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. Then we got Castle Lockthwaite as the mana. Phyrexian Tower, which is a card that actually is from Jumpstart but is in historic meta. It creates colors mana, but we can also tap it, sacrifice a creature, and actually get 2 mana. So just another thing that gives us more mana more manas, and also a sack engine. 5 swamps, 3 mountains, 4 blood crypts, 4 dragon skull summons, which I actually don't have a set of, and 4 fabled passages. So overall, it literally is Rakdos Aristocrats in Standard with just a couple cards here, just kind of make it a little bit more effective. Really, the only thing that is in the main deck that isn't in the normal Standard one is Stitcher Supplier, and the only land that we add in besides the Dragon Skull Summits is the Phyrexian Tower. So overall, it's pretty much the same deck. It is fairly effective. It did actually place first as well in a most recent tournament. I think it just did one over the weekend. This one was in Hooglandia Open. I think this one had also 104 players. So this was also on the 18th. So this is definitely a deck to look out for in the meta, that if you haven't seen it yet, it's just something to know of. And if you've been playing Standard, you know kind of like what you need to do to kind of battle against it. So now moving into the next deck here, it wouldn't be meta if there wasn't a mono red deck. There's actually two, but first we're going to go over the mono red goblins, and then we're going to take a quick gander at the other mono red deck. But overall, this is a goblin tribal deck, which is pretty cool. So it's a little bit different than the typical mono red deck that you're used to. It just uses a whole bunch of various goblins to kind of just overwhelm your opponent with just a little bunch of small creatures, little small tokens. It is very aggressive in the sense that the overall curve isn't that bad. The biggest card is probably the Muxus, which is our 6-mana card. But overall, it's a pretty solid deck in general. So first, we're going to start off with the Fanatical Firebrand. It's Goblin Pirate, even though it looks like a monkey. That's size effect, but we'll let it be a Goblin Pirate. So we got 4 of those as a haster. We can sacrifice and deal 1 damage to target. We got Skirk Prospector, which also allows us to sacrifice goblins, add red mana. So if we want to kind of ramp up or just get that additional mana, we can also sacrifice a goblin to do some things. Conspicuous Snoop, it's a card from M21. We get to play the top card revealed. You may cast a goblin from the top of our library, and as long as the top card of your library is a goblin card, it has all the activated abilities of that card. So this is a card that gains the abilities of whatever our top goblin is, which could be something like this ability if we really need that. We can also add that. You know, certain things like, you know, I don't really know. Is it activated? All activated abilities. So anything that, you know, we have to do something to do. So Cranko, just pretty much that. So anything activated. So anything that we can tap or pay mana for, it has activated abilities. You got Goblin Instigator. When it enters the battlefield, we create a 1/1 red goblin, so it just makes another goblin onto the battlefield. Goblin Incinerator, we can cycle it. So kind of like a burn spell. And we get to do X amount of damage equal to the number of goblins on the battlefield. So it's definitely a good burn spell to get rid of something big. As well as a 2/1 as well. Goblin Chieftain just is our chieftain, which gives all our other goblins +1/+1 and haste, so they can attack immediately on the battlefield when he comes into the battlefield. Goblin Matron, into the battlefield, we may search our library for a goblin card, reveal that card, put it into our hand, shuffle our library, so he helps us search for some more goblins. Goblin War Chief makes our goblins cost less, gives also our goblins haste, so Chieftain in this just gives all our goblins haste, as well as making this one makes our goblins cheaper, doesn't give them pumps, but cheaper goblins is always good. Goblin Ringleader enters the battlefield, reveal top 4 parts of our library, put all goblin cards reveal this way into our hand, the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. If you haven't noticed, our whole deck, for the most part, other than our lands, are all goblins, so definitely a good way to get a lot of cards into our hand. Then you got Cranko, he tap and create X 1/1 red goblin creatures to X the number of goblins we control, so it's just a way to make even more goblins. And then you got Muxus, Goblin Brand, when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 6 cards of our library, put all goblin creatures and cards with mana cost 5 or less among them onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of our library in any random order. Whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+1 to turn for each other goblin you control. So as you can see here, this kind of is our finisher. Combine that with something like Goblin War Chief or Goblin Chieftain, it attacks immediately once it comes to the battlefield. And then we're getting a whole bunch of goblins that are cheap. He's the only goblin in our deck that actually costs over 5. So any of the goblins we reveal are all coming on the battlefield pretty much for free. So overall, this is the way to finish. It's a pretty solid deck. I haven't personally tested it out. As you can see, I'm still incomplete on some of the goblin cards. I just need to pretty much get some more wild cards before I can get the whole deck list complete. But it does look like a fun tribal deck if you're looking for something tribal to play in the meta. I could say maybe tweak it, maybe if you want to add some spot removal, but I think the deck overall has enough aggressiveness that maybe you don't actually need it. So the one other thing you may notice is that sometimes the meta may also be a little bit more aggressive, so there's some decks that are slower. This is kind of that deck is kind of like the goal here is let me just hit you with as many things as possible, as quickly as possible, to hopefully kill you before you get your combo off or do enough to prevent me from doing what I need to do. So another fun deck. All right, so it wouldn't be yet again another meta without a mono red deck. We're gonna go over this one real quick just because it's slightly different on what it's trying to do, but pretty much it's just another mono red deck, just trying to do mono red things. It's trying to hit you as hard as possible, as quickly as possible. Our maximum curve is 4. Majority of things cost 3 or less. So overall the deck is pretty aggressive. He plays Fanatical Firebrand for that extra ping, a haster, Gratu Lava Runner, as long as there's 2 more instant sorcery cards in our graveyard, it gets +1/+0, so definitely good. Got some shocks for spot removal, latent strikes. So the deck has a little bit more burn in here because there's a lot more things we can burn for bigger damage. So some latent strikes. Runaway Steamkin, because it's a very good red card, creates mana, also gets bigger the more red cards we play, so definitely good in that. Pyromancer, enters the battlefield, 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, so damage to the opponent's face. Bone Crusher Giant, same thing, damage to the opponent's face. Lay up the stage to kind of refill our hand back up once we kind of burn through our hand. Wizard Lightning, another thing that costs more, do 3 damage to any target. Experimental Frenzy. Pretty much, we may look at the top part of our library anytime you play land cards from the top of our library. You can't play land cards or cast spells from our hand. So this is kind of one of those things that once we kind of run low, we can kind of play things on top of our library, cast Embereth and Mountains. So overall the deck, the more you can see that it's not like the typical mono red deck. This is like more of, let me hit you for a lot of small damage, and then towards the end of the game I'm going to kind of finish you with bigger damage. That's kind of what this deck is trying to do. It's also on the budget friendly side, so if you're looking for something a little bit budget friendly, this is definitely a deck to maybe look out for. I'm also just noticing I'm missing a card, so give me 1 second to add that in. Alright, and we're back. The one card I was missing was actually a very important card that kind of makes a lot of this stuff reusable after we've already casted it, and that card is Grim Lavamancer. So if you don't know what he does, it is a 1-cost 1/1 that we get to tap 1 red, we get to exile 2 cards from our library, our graveyard, and deal 2 damage to any target. So it's, in a way, it's our way to kind of just finishing off our opponent after we use burn spells. So if our opponent can't get rid of our graveyard, we can just use our burn spells or anything that goes in the graveyard and actually just do more damage to our opponent's face. Definitely a good way to finish the game. It's only a 1-of, it's not like a need it for the deck, but overall this deck is just trying to play things to do damage to your opponent's face as hard as possible, as quickly as possible. And if our opponent's not playing enough counter spells, I mean, the shocks and things like that will definitely do enough damage to them, you know, to the point where they may not be able to gain enough life to kind of stop them from dying. Alright, so the next deck up is going to be a mono blue tempo deck. If you haven't seen this deck either, it's another very aggressive deck that kind of slows down our opponent from playing anything. As the deck plays a lot of counter spells, things to kind of tap down things. It's more of a reactive deck in the sense that a lot of things have flash for the most part. But overall the deck is pretty straightforward. It adds a lot of things from historic that kind of just slow down our opponent's things. Very cheap counters and things like that. Things we benefit from playing on our opponent's turn, and then we kind of just leave our mana open on our turn to play maybe a couple things. But overall, we're just flashing in things, doing opponent damage to our opponent's face. Just playing everything on tempo in the sense that we're leaving stuff open on our turn and then leaving stuff open on their turn to kind of react to whatever they're doing. So to start off, we're playing Curious Obsession. This kind of pretty much gives any creature +1/+1, as if it does damage to common damage to a player, we have to draw a card. And if the only downfall is if we don't attack with that creature, we have to sacrifice the Curious Obsession. But it's a good way to get some cheap draw effects. We only play 1 of because the other card we're playing is the Octopus, so there's that. Opt for some draw effects and a scry, definitely good in that sense. Siren, Storm, Tamer, a 1-cost 1/1 flyer. We can tap 1 blue, sacrifice it, and we get the counter target spell that targets you or a creature we control. So if they're trying to spot removal something else, we can sacrifice this in response and counter that. Or if they're trying to burn us to the face, we can sacrifice this and counter that. Spectral Sailor for a little bit of flash flying, as well as if we get into the later game, we can tap the 4 to draw the card. Spell Pierce. Especially good. It's definitely good in the early game. It kind of targets non-creature spells unless their opponent plays 2. We draw these later in the game. It's kind of rough, but overall it's a good spot removal card that makes our opponent pretty much counter anything that's not a creature. Even in the later game, it's kind of like a way we can also even tax their things if they really want to play it, for making them play an additional 2, which could be definitely good if they're playing against something that also doesn't have a lot of lands. Definitely 2 mana could be very big. Primal Cutthroat. If you played standard meta, Primal Cutthroat's very good in Simic Flash and things like that, just because every time we play something during our opponent's turn, he gets bigger. So all our counter spells, all our other flash creatures, he'll just get bigger and bigger, and he's kind of like going to be one of our things that are going to attack our opponent's face to the point that hopefully we can finish the game with him. Lofty Denial is a very good card. It's a 2-mana counter. It counter targets spells unless our opponent pays 1, but if we control something flying, it actually counter targets spell unless our opponent pays 4. So definitely a very good strong counter in defense that counters any spell. And if we have a flyer like a Spectral Sailor or something, we can make our opponent pay even more mana to actually not have that spell counter. Merfolk Trickster is definitely a good card. It taps out a creature, it makes that creature lose all its abilities, and it has flash, so we can kind of play it in response to something. You know, we could technically make a creature lose all its abilities, which is very good. But overall a good solid 2/2 for flash, which will definitely make our Spectral Sailor even bigger. Create some Borrower. It would be a mono blue deck without Borrower to bounce things back. We can also flash him in as a 3/1 creature with flying, so if we need to get over things, he is a decent flyer that can actually get a decent amount of damage in. Lookout Dispersal, another counter here that costs 1 less if we control a pirate. Counter spell unless control pays 4, so we have a couple pirates, so definitely something that we can get for cheaper and also make our opponents pay more mana to actually play the spell, or just pretty much stop them from playing it. Then you have the Sea Dasher Octopus. It has flash. We can play it, you know, at the end of our opponent's turn. We can also mutate in response to something if we want to get that extra card draw. Just an overall solid card. We can take like a Spectral Sailor, turn into a 2/2 flyer with ability to draw a card, you know, stuff like that. But definitely a card to refill our hand back up Wizard's Retort is another spell that makes counter-target spell, gets cheaper if we have a wizard. There's a couple wizards in the deck, so we can get this for 2 mana and 20 islands. So overall, the deck is kind of slowing down our opponent on their turn. We're playing our things on their turn, and we're just attacking them because they don't have a board presence at that moment. So definitely a very high tempo deck, not a very expensive deck. The most expensive thing costs 3, but all that stuff gets cheaper. The Sea Dasher Octopus we play for 3, but really we're just going to mutate it onto one of our smaller creatures to make it bigger and just kind of get as much damage in as possible to just annoy our opponent to eventually hopefully win the game. And the last deck up, it wouldn't be a meta in Historic if we didn't have this deck there. It's a deck that is fairly strong if you haven't seen it already, but I'm sure you probably have. You've definitely probably seen it in the standard meta if you play only strictly that, but it's pretty much a mono-white Lifegain deck. It's only gotten better since certain cards have gotten added into it. It's definitely a deck that gains a lot of life, gets big creatures. Overall, it's a deck that you kind of have to look out for just on the basis of when opponents start gaining a lot of life, it's very hard to kind of get them down, especially if you have to attack their life points. So to start it off, we are going to play 4 Healer Hawks. I guess one's in Jumpstart, so there's a Jumpstart one that kind of messes it all up. But 4 Healer Hawks, 4 Lean On Vanguards at the end of our turn. If we control 3 or more creatures, it gets +1/+1 in a turn. We gain a life, so just a decent way to get some extra life gain. It's only a 1/1 that could possibly be a 2/2, and also additional way to gain a life. Sarah's Ascendant is something that's actually pretty good because as long as we have 30 more life, it gets +5/+5 and has flying, so it's definitely a good, strong late game card when our life totals is very high. Soul Warden is another good card because whenever a creature enters the battlefield, not even our creatures, but our opponent's creatures, we gain life, so a good way to gain some life. Speaker of the Heavens is a new card for M21. If we have 7 more life than our starting life total, we get to make 4 for flyers. House has Vigilance, but definitely good. We don't have to attack with it, but definitely a good way to get some good flyers onto the battlefield. Ajani's Pridemate is something that gains bigger if we have every time we gain life, so every trigger of life gain, this gets 1 bigger, 1 bigger, 1 bigger. Daxos, another solid thing that is Devotion to white. Whenever creature enters the battlefield or dies, we gain 1 life, so definitely pumping up our Ajani's Pridemate. Heliod, Sun Crowned, 3 mana, indestructible. This deck is pretty much a mono-white Devotion deck too, so there's definitely a good chance that this will also become a creature at some point because it only needs to be 5 or more. Pretty much every time we gain life, we get a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment we control. Then we can tap 2 and we just give a creature or enchantment lifelink until end of turn. Linden, another thing that's very solid just because it has Vigilance, and every time a white creature we control attacks, we gain 1 life. So every individual attack, we gain 1/1 life. Combine it with Heliod, then we're getting all these +1/+1 tokens. Combine that with Ajani's Pridemate. Ajani's Pridemate, every time if we attack with a Linden out, Ajani's Pridemate gets a trigger for every life gain to just get bigger and bigger, and it definitely becomes something that our opponent has to block. And then we got Ajani's Strength of the Pride. We gain life equal to the number of creatures we control plus the number of planeswalkers we control. We can -2 and get another Pridemate, pretty much cat on the board. And if we have 15 or more life than our starting life total, we have to exile Ajani here, and then we can do sack and each artifact and creature our opponent controls, so definitely whips out their whole board. So overall, this is a very solid deck. 24 lands in total, very solid. It's definitely a deck that you may already have put together, just because other than maybe the Soul Wardens and the Lean On Vanguards and the Sarah Ascendants, everything else is something you would see already in a standard deck. So overall, this deck is also very good if you're just looking for something very basic, something that you know. But overall, this is kind of like the meta of how it's shaping up at the moment. I know I saw Elves, so if you leave a comment down below, I can always look into the Elves decks. There's a couple other combo decks out there, but these are going to be some of the decks that a lot of people are playing currently in the meta. But there's always those chances of playing the one-offs decks that you're not prepared for. But this is definitely something to get you started if you want to hop into the Historic meta for the Open. If you want to kind of understand what the meta is like. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the Historic meta, if you've been playing Historic. What deck have you been playing? If you like the video, guys, hit that like button. If you want to post more videos, hit that subscribe button. If you want to check out one of these other videos that pop up as I'm doing all this, click one of those, and I'll see you in the next